So for those of you who are just joining us, you're watching Arirang TV's special coverage of South Korea's 21st presidential election. It's just past 10 p.m. here in South Korea's Seoul, and ballot counting has been underway for about 2 hours now. Preliminary results are beginning to come, with exit polls showing a lead for Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung. Now, as we continue to track how voting unfolded throughout the day and what the early numbers may signal moving forward, we're joined now by Hans Schattle, professor of political science at Yonsei University. Professor, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Mokyeon. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. So let's begin, Professor. So as we approach the halfway point in tonight's ballot counting, early results are slowly coming in, and alongside the exit poll results that I've mentioned, we see a forecast of 50% for Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party. So far, all of this happening, what stands out to you the most?
Well, it seems like a very comfortable win for Lee Jae-myung, and it seems as if the voters, after 6 months of uncertainty after ex-President Yoon's attempt to impose martial law, the public overall is sending a very strong message for change here. Lee Jae-myung seems to have commanded at least half the vote tonight. The exit polling is suggesting maybe somewhere between 50 to 52% is his total share. If that holds out, that's a pretty solid win, considering that there are more than two candidates. And what's also interesting is on the conservative side, Kim Moon-soo from the People Power Party, President Yoon's former party, not even possibly getting 40% of the vote. And Lee Jun-seok from the New Reform Party, who was going to be a kind of spoiler, it seemed, who potentially, had he united with Kim Moon-soo, could the two of them have put together a conservative coalition that would have kept the conservatives in power? Seems that's not panning out either. If Lee Jun-seok's vote total is projected in the exit polls ends up being about 7%. That means the two of them together would end up with about 45, 46%. So even if the conservatives had united, Lee Jae-myung still would have had a very comfortable lead tonight, with most likely more than 50% of the vote. So I don't know if it's a thunderous judgment, as the leaders of the Democratic Party are now proclaiming just after the exit poll numbers came in, but it's a very solid win. And of course, Lee Jae-myung has his party, the Democratic Party, also in the majority in the National Assembly. So it's a chance, I think, for both Lee Jae-myung, who so narrowly lost his bid for the presidency in 2022 against former President Yoon. Now he's in power, and he's got his party in control of the legislature. He can get quite a bit done if he wants.
So even though it's still kind of early, those numbers definitely seem to give us a sense of where we're headed towards. Now, Professor, also something to note for this election is that the early voting this year hit 34.74%, the second highest on record. So, but with this, both camps, rival party camps, have different claims about their, interpretation of this early voter turnout. How should we interpret these competing narratives?
Well, at the end of the day, all we can say is that the areas that seem to have the highest voter turnout, we go region by region, also end up being the areas where the Democratic Party traditionally has performed the strongest, and where I'm expecting, once we see the detailed breakdowns region by region, that the Democratic Party will probably have a very commanding lead. On the other hand, how much do regions really matter? That's also a question we'll have to dig deeper into the numbers to get a better sense, because I think increasingly, with half the country's population living in Seoul and metropolitan Seoul, just outside the capital city, the Gyeonggi-do province, I think increasingly what might be mattering more in the elections will be how the districts within Seoul are voting. I mean, just as we talk about the southwest part of the country being a very strong Democratic Party stronghold, southeast traditionally being for the conservatives, likewise, some districts in the southern half of Seoul end up being very strongly People Power Party, strongly conservative. If we see some erosion, and I'm expecting we're going to see some considerable erosion for that party in those sections of Seoul, that might be very revealing. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories in the past couple of weeks from prospective voters, even my college students, saying that they really wanted to send a message that martial law was not acceptable, that an attempt to shut down the national parliament and throw the country back into military rule was not going to stand with the voters, and that the people had to send a very strong message. So what we might see is, even in some of the conservative regions, which so far are showing lower overall turnout, voters who go conservative, either some of them may have voted for a minor party candidate or even for Lee Jae-myung, who knows, but I think a lot of them may have just stayed home and let others vote this time around, and that's why we're seeing such high turnouts in the areas where the DP is strong, because it's in those areas where the public really wanted to send a strong call for change tonight.
And that's from the capital area.
Yes.
Now, what about from other regions, Professor? We've seen the candidates focus on specific regions as they held out their campaigns in the final run. How much do you think these geographical strategies still matter here in South Korea?
Well, we can see this time around that Lee Jae-myung really tried hard to win everywhere. He didn't just go within his bases, but he spent a lot of time in the southeast part of the country. I suspect he even spent a lot of time in southern Seoul. Why not? The country's not that hard to travel. There are all these new highways that have been opened up in the past 10 to 15 years. It's much easier now than before and quicker than before for candidates to make their way nationwide. Kim Moon-soo from the PPP, he also did a national tour, but only went to Gwangju, say in the southwest, once for the May 18th commemoration of the the protests and the tragedy there in 1980. He commemorated that with Lee Jae-myung. But otherwise, he did not go to Gwangju. He kept a lower profile in the southwest. I think the PPP realized that they weren't going to likely win the Southwest this time around, where Lee Jae-myung, by contrast, I think he saw a window of opportunity to do better than expected in some of the traditional conservative strongholds, and we'll see how that plays out once the votes are counted.
We'll have to see how it unfolds. Now, Professor, as we speak about politics, we cannot always rule out cooperation with the legislative body, the parliament. As of now, the Democratic Party and its allies hold around 188 seats in the parliament, 300-seat parliament, and this surpasses the 180-seat fast-track threshold. What does this mean for the next president's ability to govern?
Well, assuming that it is indeed Lee Jae-myung, he's got a solid base now in the legislature that will be behind him. Of course, there's only one chamber in the legislature. There are a few smaller parties that will also likely work with the DP going forward. That's how they get their 188 seats. So I expect a honeymoon period for Lee Jae-myung. But as we have seen in previous presidencies, sometimes that honeymoon doesn't necessarily last long. So just as Lee Jae-myung, I think, was not taking for granted anything in the campaign cycle, I think when he's governing, he'll also have to not take for granted the DP and cooperation in the assembly. Since we still technically have a one-term presidency, I know there's been talk about constitutional change, but it seems that might go to the back burner now, I suspect. But that could also mean that Lee Jae-myung will have a honeymoon period that wears off. And if things go badly, or if there's a foreign policy mistake, or if, say, the trade negotiations with the U.S. don't go so well, or inflation persists, there's a whole variety of circumstances that can inhibit a president in terms of his or her ability to gain cooperation with the legislature. So I think Lee Jae-myung will have to be very careful, thinking in the past about how predecessors have often lost full confidence in the legislature as parties, even ruling parties, split into factions and gear up to the next election. So, if he is indeed the president-elect, Lee Jae-myung will have a window of opportunity to make some real impact, and I think he'll have to run with it and be judicious with it.
So while these numbers in Parliament will shape the president's legislative reality, the bigger picture is about the kind of public support they will walk in the office with. So regardless of who wins the election tonight, what kind of mandate do you think this election will give to the incoming administration?
Well, I think the public is going to remember, of course, that the DP dominated National Assembly with Lee Jae-myung famously, climbing over a wall to get in, recording that. I think at that moment, the public really felt very strongly in December that this party and this leader of the party, who's now on track to winning the election, that they were on the side of democracy. So they'll be expecting the DP to live up to that. And I think also one problem that we've seen in Korean politics over the years is that the two parties policy-wise tend to agree close on a lot of issues, but they have difficulty closing the deal. So this time around, can the DP, with control in both the presidential office and the legislature, can they do something about affordable housing? Can they do things about innovation or small businesses? I've been reading a lot of commentary suggesting there's concern also that South Korea's economy is not only stagnating, but the industrial base here, the industrial technology sector is lagging a bit, stagnating in comparison to China. So there's a real competitiveness drive that's going to be needed from the government in the months and years to come. Can the DP deliver that?
So before we conclude our discussion, Professor, I want to ask, what do you think is the first real test for the leadership of the incoming president? You've mentioned competitiveness too, but what kind of challenge do you think will define their opening months in the office?
Well, we have to look to foreign policy for one thing, and Lee Jae-myung has been very careful in the campaign trail to suggest a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy. He's said many times that the alliance with the U.S. is essential, that's the core for South Korea, keeping that intact. And that will be maybe a challenge because, as we know, South Korea has been in negotiations with the Trump administration over trade. And the Trump tariffs still are sitting there, despite uncertainty in the U.S. with legal wrangling in the U.S. as to whether the tariffs might be rolled back or struck down by a court. For the time being, South Korea has to chart its course economically with the Trump administration. And over the past few months, with Trump in power since January, South Korea has been in somewhat of a limbo in its relationship with the U.S. Now it'll be time for the two countries to take that forward, and all eyes will be on Lee Jae-myung.
Right, so close cooperation with the United States. We'll have to watch that closely. Professor, we'll have to end our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you for having me, Mo-kyun.
Thank you.